When I see Let's Not Meet stories, I always think of an encounter that I had while I worked at Subway in my teen years. I was maybe 16 at that time, and I'm a very petite girl. This particular night, I was working alone and we closed at 10. It was snowing and the middle of winter, so it was super dark around 9:50 p.m. when this took place. Over the course of the last hour, I noticed a man pacing the store, and I didn't really think much of it. There were a lot of homeless people that stayed behind the subway to go through the trash at the end of the night. I always brought out stuff to them whenever I could, so I thought maybe he was just trying to get a free sandwich or something. So I let it slide. 10 minutes before closing, this man walks in and starts pacing the front of the store. He was in a wife-beater tank top in the dead of winter, so my first thought was that he was high on drugs. Then, I noticed he was holding a crowbar. I tried to act calm, like I didn't see it. We didn't have a phone near the front, and I didn't want to run and be obvious. I grabbed a knife off the bread bar and politely asked him if he needed anything. He came right over to me and leaned over the side of the counter by the register, not in front of me, but beside me, like where the drinks are. He was in my personal space now, and I was terrified. He made nervous small talk with me for a bit, and then suddenly grabbed my arm and blurted out, "So, do all Subway employees have access to the safe?" I panicked and said, "No, but we all have access to this button under the register that calls the police if someone is trying to rob us. And if I recall, there's always an officer across the road at the King Soopers." I had my hand under the register drawer, and he immediately turned around and said there was no need for something like that. And then he promptly left. Good thing, because there in fact was no button under the register. We didn't have any safety precautions, so if he wanted to hurt me and get that safe, there was nothing I could have done. I was lucky to think quickly in that situation and lie to the man. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened. So, to the crowbar man, let's not meet again. To preface this, I love to drive. Like hour-long drives to nowhere with no destination in mind, just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns and eventually cities, and I'd usually take these drives at night since there was less traffic to worry about. I've done it since I've had my license 4 or 5 years ago, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor have I ever run into any trouble. That was until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They were a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together to sort personal issues out. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents as a means of coping with their alcoholism. Though now that I've moved out and I'm in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. However, on the night this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious with a clusterfuck of personal issues that I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend and couldn't focus on anything else. I decided that I would take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and not to be gone for too terribly long, since it was getting pretty late. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and left. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life. So I decided to drive further north down those familiar, dark, and winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 meters per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out around the bend, and I was just admiring the vast empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight in seemingly the middle of nowhere, the few houses miles back from the road lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away and covered in the snow. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror or see someone clamber out from the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from my headlights, and even then, I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now, it was just after 11, and I told myself that once I made the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back up towards the city, I would head back to the city and home. The roundabout was still maybe 15 to 25 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorists to worry about, right? Wrong. As I'm rounding another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazards flashing maybe a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of a sedan, dark-colored, and was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder, while the rest jutted out onto the road, like they had to pull over in a hurry, but didn't quite manage to do that. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like maybe blood on the inside of the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. Cell phone reception is spotty at best in this part of the country, but more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you pray, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any service. So, a lone female on the road at night, pulling up near a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on the inside with no cell service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds and read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried something terrible had happened to whoever was in that vehicle, and I thought that I needed to help. These roads don't get a lot of traffic late at night, and the temperatures were well below freezing. If someone were hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them but me. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle, I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut off the music, and called out, "Hey, anyone there? Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I was worried they were passed out or somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them. I told myself I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything, I would leave, and the moment there was reception, I'd call it in. And if I did hear someone, well, I'd figure out my next course of action then. So again, I shout, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" There was a silence for a beat, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a gruff voice saying, Yeah. I was relieved at first and was about to say something in response or possibly even stop my car and get out when I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else on the vehicle, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making their way towards my car, fast. The person did not have any blood on them or appeared injured in any way, wearing a mask, not like a face mask for COVID or a ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks you would see in the Purge movies. And they were holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was, and I couldn't get a good look, but from its length and shape, my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar or something. I don't need to tell you that I slammed on the gas the moment I noticed those things and drove like a bat straight out of hell, my heart thundering in my chest, my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down in my haste, and the music was still shut off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me. Though I had no clue what they were saying, I just knew I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove away, mostly to see if they were getting in the sedan to follow chase or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road, watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror, I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks and no trace of blood on him. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards the town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends, T, who was a police officer, to tell him what happened and what I should do. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was, did they follow me, and etc., he told me since it was out of city limits, he couldn't do much on his end, but he could get in contact with the local police or sheriff in that jurisdiction to take my statement and check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for the police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs and panic, I managed to tell him what happened not even 10 or so minutes ago. He was, as you could imagine, super freaked out for my safety and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave and that I was okay, but I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruisers pulling into the lot. I gave the police my statement, and they assured me they would go back to the spot I told them the sedan had been to take a look, and that they would try to catch the guys who did it. Though with no cameras and no description of the men, I wasn't sure they'd be able to. I didn't even get the license plate number, though at that time of my panic, the thought never came to mind until the police were asking if I got it. All they had to go off was a dark-colored sedan and two guys with masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the whole night, listening to every sound the house made in fear that it would be those guys arriving any minute to finish whatever they had started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from the police about whether or not they have any leads, and I'm not sure they ever will. I'm just thankful I'm still here and that I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing there? Why? Was that blood on the inside of the car? Or just a ruse to get more attention? If it was really blood, did they hurt someone else? What would have happened to me if I had stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late night drives to anywhere, and I hope I never cross paths with those freaks again. I don't know how long he was in my bed or why he was there. All I know is that he woke me up with a kiss, which I promptly wiped off my hand. I was fully clothed, which hinted to me nothing had happened, but the buttons on my pants were undone. I don't know if they were undone the whole time or if he undid them. Under the sheets, I could see that my shirt was pushed up so he could put his hands on my waist and hold me close to him. I moved his hands off and he went back to sleep. I sat up in shock and caught a glimpse of his face. I asked him, "What are you doing?" And he yawned and said, "Resting." I brought out my hands and tightened them into fists. I was ready to defend myself, and at that moment he said, "Okay, I'll leave," and walked out of my room. I was so overcome with horror that I pushed my dresser up to my door to make sure he couldn't come back in. I immediately took a shower and was relieved that nothing worse had happened to me, to my knowledge. After all, I'd gone to bed at 11, and when I found him in my bed, it was 5 a.m., and I had a weird dream that night too. In that dream, I lived in a zoo, and the zookeeper deliberately let every animal out of the cage so they would roam free. One of those animals was a tiger, and when it saw me, it immediately started trying to eat me, so I fought back. I was wrestling it, then I lost, and as the tiger had pinned me down, it started licking me, and that is when I woke up to him kissing me. In my drunken stupor, I was fighting him. So, my roommate's cousin, let's never meet again. At age 12, I started babysitting for family friends who had 3 daughters ages 4 to 7. They lived in a cul-de-sac where nearly every home housed a young couple with children in elementary school. The neighborhood was extremely close-knit, like the 1950s American block party communities. They had a communal policy on using one another's toys. Any kid could use a play structure in someone else's yard any time without asking. Shortly after I started working in the neighborhood, they revised the rule to any time a family is not using a babysitter to watch their kids. To ensure that I would not get overwhelmed supervising a swarm of kids that I wasn't paid to watch, I was welcome to take the girls to play in any other yard as they wanted. Their parents even gave me permission to let them play in someone else's yard or sandbox independently if I needed a short break. Being an avid Babysitters Club reader, I didn't leave the girls outside unsupervised ever. I would wait until someone else wanted a water or bathroom break and then corral everyone inside temporarily. Similarly, when the girls wanted to play in the treehouse owned by an older couple a few doors down the street, I climbed up and crouched in the little house with them, even when the tight space filled with 3 little and 1 big body made me claustrophobic. I don't recall whether my everyone inside or everyone outside together rule preceded the first odd interaction that I had with the immediate next-door neighbor or not. But when the police questioned the girls that I babysat years later, they said nothing bad ever happened when I watched them because I set up that weird, sometimes annoying rule. One day, While playing basketball with the girls in the driveway, the next door neighbor came outside in a baseball cap and sunglasses and sat down on his second-story deck to read a paperback. I later noticed he turned his chair around 180 degrees to face us and the basketball hoop. I couldn't tell if he was looking at us, and he seemed to have no reaction to me staring at him, flipping pages in the book like someone would when reading. This behavior repeated every time we played basketball. Eventually, once I noticed him in the chair, accessories on, I would suggest a game that we could play inside or in the front yard, but out of view. The strange neighbor was familiar to me as he went to my church, and I have never seen someone kneel in a pew, head bowed and hands folded, with the same level of intensity before or since. Once when my family was seated behind him, the priest came over to ask me to lead the children's mass during the homily because the usual person was out sick. This guy turned around and glared at me like I'd interrupted his prayer time. When I worked in the church nursery during various masses, I would often make eye contact with him as he waited in line outside the nursery door to use the restroom. From what I gleaned from our family friends and other people in the neighborhood, the odd basketball observer was a nice guy who gave up his apartment and job in the city to take care of his sick elderly mother. Since everyone thought he was great, and since he went to church, this was before the Catholic sex scandal broke, I figured I was in the wrong for finding him creepy. I was used to guys in their 40s or 50s being lewd or hitting on me in public, and was projecting onto this guy who was not doing anything wrong. Every summer, when the family opened their above-ground pool, I kept an eye out for the guy next door. I was certain that if I was right about him being a creep, he would not miss the opportunity to watch with his sunglasses on and book in hand while I was in my bathing suit. Since he never set foot out on his deck when the kids and I were in swimsuits playing in the pool or backyard, I was more convinced I was conceited and mean. But then, I caught him looking in the window as I cleaned up after movie night. The girls and I put on a film after bath time, and instead of watching it theater style in total darkness, we kept some lights on so I could braid the girls' hair. The big screen TV was used for movies and was located in an addition on the house with floor-to-ceiling windows. And though my parents were OCD about shutting blinds and curtains when the sun went down to prevent people from seeing in, our family friends had no window treatments on the big modern windows. When I turned off the last light in the room, a floor lamp right next to one of the windows facing the strange neighbor's house, I could see into the darkness outside, where the weird man sat on his deck in a chair moved in line with the window I was looking through. I looked over my shoulder and realized he had line of sight on where the girls and I were sitting on the floor during the movie. As soon as I looked back, I glimpsed him hustling inside his mother's house. I would have doubted I'd seen him at all if he had not left the chair in an unusual spot. After watching him move the chair when he stepped outside to read during many a basketball matchup, I knew where the chair sat that night, facing the window into the family room, was not the chair's usual position on the deck. After that incident, I would suggest playing board games in another room or insist on watching movies theater style to ensure that he could not peep on what we did that night. Once the girls were asleep, I avoided the family room entirely because I was paranoid about being watched. If I wasn't in the kitchen, away from all the windows, doing homework or reading, I would walk around the original first floor footprint of the house, where all the windows had curtains. The first time the parents noticed my change in routine They insisted I could watch TV or movies in the family room if I wanted. I didn't mention anything to them because I was worried my concerns were silly and conceited. When I was 17, my family heard an evening cable news story about a man in our town caught in a police sting operation in which a woman pretended to prostitute her 2-year-old. When they raided his house, they found a ton of child pornography. Our family friends called a couple weeks later because they wanted to know how I knew the young man next door to them was not safe. "He's the guy I heard about on TV." As they described it, when the police checked his computers, they found his blog where he wrote about his obsession with one of the girls who lived next door to him. The blog detailed his fantasies involving her and his plans to act on them. Things like lying in the treehouse for hours, hoping to corner her when she climbed up alone to play. Many of his entries focus on taking advantage or kidnapping the girl while the babysitter was in charge. In his head, babysitters were like the ones in old movies, talking to friends on the phone or making out with the boy they invited over instead of caring for the children. As it became clear I did neither one of those things, his plans evolved to killing the babysitter, taking the girl, and getting out of Dodge. After talking to the girls to ensure they were not victims, the police suggested I might know something to have acted the way I did. When the parents disclosed what they knew, all the pieces, the frequent run-ins at the church when I had children in my care, or the weird things he did when he knew I was watching the kids next door, all fit together cohesively, and I was relieved I was not crazy or mean-spirited. I was perhaps conceited. The focus was not on me, but on the children, but I was not crazy. I recognize I was not the person most at risk in this situation. So, suburb pedo and would-be murderer, let's not meet again. Hi, thanks for watching the video. I really appreciate it. If you want to send me a story to read, feel free to do so. My email is in the description of the video. And if you want to follow me on my social media, just to get updates or maybe to talk, the links and info for my Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram accounts are also in the description. And finally, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And turn that bell on to be notified for upcoming surprises. And remember, your fear feeds me.